Upon returning home, Ellie discovers her world turned upside down and uncovers secrets tied to the house she thought she knew everything about. As mysteries unravel, Ellie must confront buried truths and fight to preserve not just the home she loves, but the family it holds together. Before we begin, drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. If you believe the truth always comes out, like and subscribe. Now sit back and enjoy the story. Eleanor Ellie Harper sat on the porch swing of her beloved home, gently swaying as she sipped her morning coffee. The house at 12 Maple Lane wasn't grand. It was a modest two-story colonial with faded blue shutters and ivy creeping up one side. But it was hers. Every creaky floorboard, every sunbeam that streamed through the lace curtains in the living room told a story. This was where she'd taught her son how to ride a bike, where she'd baked countless apple pies for family gatherings, and where she'd held her husband's hand during his final days. At 68, Ellie had lived more than half her life within these walls, but time hadn't been kind to her lately. Her hands shook slightly now when she reached for her teacup, and there were moments when words escaped her mid-sentence. Still, she prided herself on being independent, stubborn even, about maintaining her routine, until the day everything changed. It started with a sharp pain behind her left eye while she was watering the garden. Then came the dizziness, so sudden and intense that she dropped the hose and crumpled onto the grass. Neighbors found her unconscious, sprawled beneath the hydrangeas. By the time Claire arrived at the hospital hours later, Ellie was already in recovery after suffering what doctors called a mild stroke. Mild or not, it left its mark. Ellie couldn't walk without assistance. Her speech slurred occasionally, and fatigue clung to her like a second skin. Claire, ever the overachiever, took charge immediately. At 42, she was used to fixing problems, whether it was managing her high-powered marketing job or mediating disputes between her teenage twins. When the doctors suggested someone stay close by during Ellie's recovery, Claire didn't hesitate. She packed a suitcase, kissed her kids goodbye, and moved into 12 Maple Lane, telling herself it would only be temporary. "This place hasn't changed a bit," Claire muttered under her breath as she stepped inside, brushing dust off the antique mirror in the foyer. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and old books, a scent that always reminded her of childhood summers spent reading Nancy Drew novels on the window seat upstairs. But nostalgia quickly gave way to reality. As Claire began sorting through bills, organizing medications, and tidying up the clutter Ellie had let pile up, she noticed something odd. In the study, a small room tucked away at the back of the house, she found a locked wooden box sitting atop the bookshelf. It wasn't particularly remarkable, just an ordinary keepsake box with tarnished brass corners. Yet it seemed out of place among Ellie's usual knickknacks and photo albums. Curiosity gnawed at Claire. She asked Ellie about it casually one afternoon while helping her eat lunch in bed. "Oh, that old thing?" Ellie replied, waving a dismissive hand. "Just some papers I've been meaning to go through. Nothing important." But Claire wasn't convinced. There was something in Ellie's tone, a flicker of unease, that made her wonder if her mother was hiding more than she let on. And why did Ellie glance toward the study door before changing the subject? As days turned into weeks, Claire settled into a rhythm of caregiving and household chores. But the locked box lingered in the back of her mind, a silent mystery waiting to be unraveled. Little did she know, opening it would unearth secrets that had lain dormant for decades and force her to confront truths about her family she never saw coming. Eleanor Harper leaned heavily on her cane as the taxi pulled up to 12 Maple Lane. She had spent nearly 6 weeks in the hospital and rehab facility, enduring grueling physical therapy sessions and swallowing her pride while nurses helped her bathe and dress. But nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her at home. The first thing Ellie noticed was the silence. No birds chirping from the feeders she kept stocked year-round. No rustling leaves brushing against the windows. Just an eerie stillness that made her stomach churn. Then she saw it, the real estate sign planted squarely in the middle of her front yard like a dagger through her heart. SOLD, it proclaimed in bold red letters. Beyond it, chaos reigned. Boxes were stacked haphazardly on the lawn, their contents spilling out into the grass. Her furniture, her life, was gone. The house stood hollow, its windows dark and lifeless. "What?" Ellie whispered, clutching her chest as if trying to hold herself together. Her knees buckled, but the driver caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked gently. She shook her head, too stunned to speak. Shuffling forward with trembling steps, she approached the wreckage of her world. A framed photograph lay face down in the dirt, a picture of her late husband, Jack, smiling beside her on their wedding day. She bent down painfully to pick it up, brushing off the glass shards clinging to the frame. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched it to her chest. That's when she spotted Claire sitting on the porch steps, scrolling absently through her phone. At the sound of Ellie's cane tapping against the sidewalk, Claire looked up, startled. "Mom, you're back early," she said, standing quickly. Her voice carried a nervous edge. "Claire." Ellie's tone was low, dangerous. "What is this? What have you done?" Claire hesitated, her usual confidence faltering under her mother's piercing gaze. I thought it was for the best, Mom. You can't live here anymore. Not after everything that's happened. It's too much for you to handle alone." "For the best?" Ellie repeated, incredulous. "You sold my house without even asking me?" "It's not just your house, Mom," Claire snapped, her composure cracking. "It's our family home. Don't you see? You've been holding on to this place for years, refusing to let go, even though it's falling apart. And now, after your stroke, it's clear you can't take care of yourself here anymore." Ellie stared at her daughter, disbelief warring with anger. "So you decided to make decisions for me? To sell the one thing I've worked my entire life to keep? How dare you?" "I didn't do this lightly," Claire shot back, her voice rising. "I talked to Dad's lawyer. He agreed it was the right move. He said selling the house would give you financial security, maybe even enough to move into assisted living or hire full-time help." "Assisted living?" Ellie spat, her face flushing with indignation. "Is that what you think I need? To be shuffled off somewhere because you're too busy to deal with me?" "That's not fair," Claire cried, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm doing what's best for you, whether you want to admit it or not. I love you, Mom. That's why I did this." But Ellie wasn't listening. She turned away, hobbling toward the empty shell of her home. Inside, the walls echoed with emptiness. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet felt wrong. Alien. This wasn't her house anymore. It was a stranger's. Her gaze landed on the study door, slightly ajar. Something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance amidst the devastation. She moved toward it, leaning on her cane for support. Pushing the door open, she froze. The locked wooden box was gone. Ellie stood in the doorway of the study, her breath shallow, her grip tightening on the cane until her knuckles turned white. The absence of the locked wooden box gnawed at her like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She turned to face Claire, who had followed her inside, arms crossed defensively. "You sold my house," Ellie said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You took everything, my furniture, my memories, and you didn't even ask me." Claire sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Mom, please try to understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Ellie echoed, incredulous. "By stealing my home out from under me? By deciding what's best for me without so much as a conversation?" "It's not just your home, Mom," Claire snapped, throwing up her hands. "It belongs to all of us. To me, to Ryan, to your grandchildren. Do you really think we could afford to keep this place going if something happened to you? The upkeep alone is astronomical. And now, after your stroke..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Look, I talked to Dad's lawyer, and he agreed it made sense financially. Selling the house gives you stability for the rest of your life. You'd have money for caregivers, medical bills, whatever you need." Ellie stared at her daughter, stunned by the cold pragmatism in her tone. This wasn't the warm, loving Claire who used to bake cookies with her in the kitchen or curl up on the couch to watch old movies. This was someone else entirely, a stranger wearing her daughter's face. "And what about what I want?" Ellie demanded, her voice cracking. "Did anyone bother to ask me how I felt about losing the only place I've ever called home? Or did you just assume I'm too old and feeble to make my own decisions?" Claire flinched but quickly masked it with defiance. "You're being unreasonable, Mom. You can't stay here. Not like this. Not when every day is a risk. What happens if you fall again? If no one finds you in time? Would you rather end up back in the hospital or worse? The words hit Ellie like a slap, cutting deeper than any insult could. For a moment she couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion. She looked around the barren room, imagining the echoes of laughter, tears, and love that once filled these walls. All of it erased, replaced by silence and emptiness. I built this house, Ellie whispered finally, her voice breaking. Not just the physical structure, the life within it. Every nail, every beam, it holds a piece of me, of us. And you threw it all away because it made sense financially. Her eyes met Claire's, blazing with pain and betrayal. How could you do this to me? To our family? Claire opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, visibly struggling. For the first time since the confrontation began, her armor cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Mom, she choked out. I thought I was doing the right thing. I swear I did. I wanted to take care of you, to make sure you were safe. But maybe I went about it the wrong way. Ellie didn't reply. She simply turned and shuffled toward the front door, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, highlighting the scattered remnants of her life. She sank onto the porch steps, clutching the photograph of Jack to her chest. Behind her, Claire hesitated, torn between guilt and frustration. Finally, she sat down beside her mother, leaving a careful space between them. Neither spoke. The weight of unspoken words hung thick in the air. For the first time in decades, Ellie felt truly homeless. Not because the house was gone, but because the trust she'd placed in her family felt shattered beyond repair. The silence between Ellie and Claire stretched like a chasm, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the scattered boxes and empty spaces where furniture once stood. Ellie sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly around the photograph of Jack, as if clinging to the last tangible piece of her former life. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice quieter now, tinged with guilt but still laced with defensiveness. Mom, I know this is hard for you, but you have to understand. I didn't act alone. I had to make decisions quickly while you were in the hospital. You weren't able to sign anything yourself, so I used the power of attorney Dad left me. Ellie's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Power of attorney? What are you talking about? Claire hesitated, clearly uneasy under her mother's piercing gaze. When Dad passed away, he named me as your healthcare proxy. He said it was just in case something happened to you, so someone could step in and handle things if you couldn't. I thought he meant for situations exactly like this. Ellie stared at her daughter, disbelief warring with anger. That was never meant for selling my house, Claire. That document was supposed to protect me, not strip me of everything I hold dear. I know how it sounds, Claire said, her voice rising slightly. But I didn't abuse it, Mom. I did what I thought was right. I consulted Dad's lawyer. He agreed it was within my rights. And honestly, I didn't think you'd object once you saw the numbers. The sale price will cover your medical expenses and give you enough to live comfortably for years. Maybe even move somewhere nice, closer to James or me. At the mention of her son, Ellie stiffened. James knows about this? She asked sharply. Claire hesitated again, avoiding her mother's eyes. Not exactly. I told him I was thinking about selling the house, but he didn't seem interested. You know how he is. He's always been more focused on his own life than ours. Ellie shook her head slowly, overwhelmed by the betrayal. Not only had Claire acted unilaterally, but she had done so without consulting James, her brother, who might have offered a different perspective, or at least given Ellie some semblance of support. Do you realize what you've done? Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. This wasn't just a transaction, Claire. This was my home, my sanctuary, the place where I raised you and your brother, where I cared for your father when he was sick, where I built a life filled with memories that can never be replaced. Claire looked away, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Mom. I truly am. But I swear to you, I believe this was the best choice. For all of us. For our family. Ellie didn't respond. She simply rose from the porch steps, leaning heavily on her cane, and walked toward the driveway. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down not just by physical exhaustion, but by the crushing realization that her children, her own flesh and blood, had conspired to take away the one thing that grounded her. As she reached the edge of the property, she glanced back at the house one final time. The real estate sign loomed like an accusation, its bold red letters mocking her. Sold. And yet amidst the devastation, a spark of resolve flickered within her. She may have lost the house, but she hadn't lost herself. Not yet. There were still questions unanswered, secrets buried deep within the walls of 12 Maple Lane, and perhaps within the mysterious wooden box that had vanished along with everything else. Ellie turned to Claire, her expression hardened with determination. You say you sold the house for my own good. Fine. But tell me this. What happened to the locked box in the study? The one you claimed didn't matter? Claire blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in topic. Her mouth opened, then closed again, betraying her unease. Whatever lay inside that box, it clearly meant more than she had let on. The next morning, Ellie sat at the kitchen table in what remained of her home. The room was eerily quiet without the familiar hum of appliances or the comforting scent of coffee brewing. A single cardboard box sat on the counter. Its contents, her mother's old recipe cards and a few mismatched dishes, the only remnants of decades of living. She stared blankly at the surface of the table, replaying Claire's words over and over in her mind. Power of attorney. Best for the family. Each phrase felt like another brick in the wall, separating her from the daughter she once knew. But it was the mystery of the locked wooden box that gnawed at her most fiercely. What had Claire done with it? And why did she lie about its importance? Just as Ellie was about to rise and attempt to sort through the chaos outside, the doorbell rang. Startled, she grabbed her cane and shuffled toward the front door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit holding a leather briefcase. His expression was calm but serious, his posture professional yet approachable. "Who is it?" she called out cautiously. "Mrs. Harper, my name is David Monroe. I'm an attorney representing your late husband's estate." His voice was warm, though tinged with formality. Ellie hesitated before opening the door. "What can I do for you, Mr. Monroe?" He offered a polite smile. "May I come in? There are some matters regarding the property at 12 Maple Lane that require your attention." Her stomach tightened, but she nodded and stepped aside, gesturing toward the sparse living room. They sat across from each other on folding chairs left behind by movers, the air thick with tension. "I'll get straight to the point," David began, setting his briefcase on the floor. He opened it and retrieved a folder filled with documents. "As you're likely aware, the house has been sold. However, during the title transfer process, we discovered something unusual." Ellie frowned. "Unusual how?" David adjusted his tie, clearly choosing his words carefully. "There's a trust fund associated with the property, a significant one. It appears to have been established years ago, tied directly to the ownership of the house. The funds were meant to remain dormant until certain conditions were met." Ellie's brow furrowed deeper. "A trust fund? But Jack and I never set up anything like that. We didn't have the kind of money to create something so elaborate." "That's just it," David replied, leaning forward slightly. "According to these records, the trust wasn't created by either you or your husband. Someone else set it up, and they listed you as the primary beneficiary." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Who would do such a thing? David shook his head. "Unfortunately, the documentation doesn't specify who initiated the trust. It's anonymous, which complicates matters significantly. But here's the critical part. The sale of the house triggers the release of those funds, and based on preliminary estimates," he paused, glancing at the papers in his hand, "the amount is substantial, enough to change your financial situation entirely." Ellie sank back into her chair, her mind racing. Who could have done this? Why would someone anonymously tie a fortune to her beloved home? And why hadn't Jack ever mentioned it? Before she could ask more questions, David added, "There's one more detail you should know. The trust includes a stipulation. It requires you to uncover the identity of the person who created it. Only then will you gain full access to the funds." Ellie blinked, stunned. You're saying I have to solve a mystery to inherit this money? In essence, yes, David confirmed. It seems whoever set this up wanted you to dig into the past. Perhaps there's something they needed you to find or remember. Ellie's thoughts immediately turned to the locked wooden box. Could it hold the key to unraveling this enigma? She glanced toward the empty study, her heart pounding. Thank you, Mr. Monroe, she said finally, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. I'll need time to process all of this. David nodded sympathetically. Of course. Take all the time you need. But please keep in mind, the clock is ticking. You have 6 months to fulfill the trust requirements before the funds revert to the state. After he left, Ellie sat alone in the silence, her mind ablaze with possibilities. This revelation changed everything, not just the loss of her home, but the very foundation of her life with Jack. Secrets, it seemed, had been woven into the fabric of their marriage, hidden beneath layers of love and routine. And now, whether she liked it or not, Ellie would have to confront them. Ellie sat frozen in her chair long after David Monroe had left, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a storm cloud. The trust fund wasn't just an unexpected windfall, it was a puzzle wrapped in secrecy, tied to the very house she had fought so hard to keep. Someone unknown, had gone to great lengths to ensure that 12 Maple Lane remained protected. But who? And why? Her mind raced through decades of memories, searching for any clue, any hint of someone outside their immediate family who might have cared enough about the house to take such drastic measures. Jack's face floated before her eyes, his gentle smile and steady hands. Had he known about this? Was this another secret he had kept from her all these years? She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The questions swirled endlessly. Who created the trust? What conditions needed to be met? And most importantly, why had they chosen her as the beneficiary? Claire found her there hours later, still sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the folder David had left behind. "Mom," she said cautiously, stepping into the room. "Are you okay?" Ellie looked up, her expression distant but sharp. "Did your father ever mention anything to you about a trust fund? Or anyone helping us with the house when we first bought it?" Claire frowned, taken aback by the question. "A trust fund? No, never. Why are you asking?" Ellie hesitated, then gestured toward the documents spread out on the table. "Someone set up a trust decades ago to protect this house. They made me the beneficiary, but they didn't tell me who they were or why they did it." Claire's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. "This is unbelievable. Do you think it has something to do with Dad?" "I don't know," Ellie admitted, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "But it feels like it does. Like maybe this was part of some plan he never told me about." Claire sank into the chair across from her, shaking her head. "If Dad knew, don't you think he would have said something? Especially if it involved money? Or the house?" "Maybe he couldn't," Ellie murmured, more to herself than to Claire. "Or maybe he thought I didn't need to know." The silence between them stretched taut, filled with unspoken accusations and shared grief. Finally, Claire spoke, her tone softer now. "What happens next? Do you have to figure out who set this up?" Ellie nodded. "That's the condition. I have to uncover the identity of whoever created the trust and understand why they did it before I can access the funds. Otherwise, everything reverts to the state." Claire let out a low whistle. "That's intense. Do you even know where to start?" Ellie's gaze drifted toward the empty study, her thoughts returning to the locked wooden box. Something inside her whispered that the answers lay hidden there, if only she could find it. "I think so," she said quietly, "but I'll need your help." Claire stiffened, clearly uneasy. "My help? After everything I've done?" "This isn't about what happened yesterday," Ellie interrupted, her voice firm. "This is bigger than both of us. If we're going to get to the bottom of this, we'll have to work together. Can you do that?" For a moment, Claire looked torn, guilt warring with reluctance. Then she sighed, nodding slowly. "Okay, I'll help. But Mom, where do we even begin?" Ellie reached for the cane leaning against the table and stood, determination etched into every line of her face. "We start with the one thing no one seems willing to talk about, The locked box. It disappeared when the house was sold, but I'm betting you know more about it than you've let on. Claire opened her mouth to protest, but Ellie held up a hand, cutting her off. Don't lie to me again, Claire. Not about this. Whatever's in that box might hold the key to everything. Claire hesitated, then dropped her gaze, shame flickering across her features. You're right, she admitted softly. I took it. I didn't want to say anything because, well, I wasn't sure what I'd find inside, but I still have it. Ellie felt a surge of relief and dread. The box was within reach, but what secrets would it reveal? Secrets that could shatter the fragile bonds holding her family together, or perhaps mend them once and for all. Bring it to me, Ellie said firmly. It's time we face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. The days that followed were a blur of activity for Ellie. With Claire's reluctant assistance and David Monroe's guidance, she began piecing together fragments of her past, searching for any clue that might shed light on the mysterious trust. The locked wooden box had been retrieved from Claire's car trunk, its tarnished brass corners glinting faintly in the dim light of the empty house. But it remained stubbornly sealed, its secrets guarded by a rusted lock that refused to yield. For now, they turned their attention elsewhere, to Jack's study, where decades of memories lay buried beneath layers of dust. Ellie sifted through boxes of old records, tax documents, and faded photographs, each discovery stirring bittersweet emotions. It was during one such search that she stumbled upon something unexpected, a yellowed envelope tucked inside an ancient copy of Moby Dick, Jack's favorite novel. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a small stack of black and white photographs. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough, snapshots of Jack sitting at a cafe table, sipping coffee and smiling warmly at the camera. But then Ellie noticed something unsettling. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman Ellie didn't recognize. Young, elegant, with sharp features and an air of quiet confidence. She leaned forward slightly, her expression animated as if engaged in deep conversation. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Who was this woman? And why had Jack never mentioned her? Mom, Claire's voice broke through her thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a stack of files. What is it? Wordlessly, Ellie handed her the photographs. Claire studied them, her brow furrowing. This isn't Aunt Margaret or anyone else we know. Do you think she's connected to the trust? I don't know, Ellie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, but I intend to find out. Over the next few days, Ellie immersed herself in the task of uncovering the truth. She pored over old letters, bank statements, and property deeds, looking for any mention of the woman in the photos. One letter in particular caught her eye. A handwritten note from Jack dated nearly 30 years ago. Addressed to someone named LM, it read, I hope you understand why I can't tell her yet. It's not the right time. But please know how grateful I am for everything you've done. For us. When the moment comes, I promise she'll know the truth. Ellie stared at the words, her heart pounding. Who was LM? What truth had Jack promised to reveal? And why had he waited so long? David Monroe proved invaluable in tracing the origins of the trust. Through painstaking research, he discovered that the funds had been deposited incrementally over several decades, beginning shortly after Ellie and Jack purchased the house. Each transaction was meticulously documented, but the source account remained anonymous, shielded behind layers of legal protections. It's almost like whoever set this up wanted to ensure the house stayed in your family, David explained during one of their meetings. They went to great lengths to keep their identity hidden, but also left breadcrumbs, just enough to make you curious. And what about the conditions? Ellie asked, clutching the photograph tightly. Do we have any idea what needs to happen before I can access the money? David hesitated, flipping through the documents. Not explicitly. The language is vague. It mentions uncovering the foundation of trust and honoring the legacy. Honestly, it feels more symbolic than practical. Ellie nodded thoughtfully. Symbols, legacy, trust. The phrases echoed in her mind, intertwining with the image of the unknown woman in Jack's cryptic letter. Something, or someone, had played a pivotal role in securing their home, protecting it even beyond Jack's death. But who? And why would they go to such lengths without seeking recognition? As Ellie delved deeper into the mystery, Claire found herself drawn into the investigation despite her initial reluctance. Together, they visited the local library, scouring archived newspapers for references to the house or its previous owners. They interviewed elderly neighbors who remembered the Harpers moving in, hoping someone might recall a visitor matching the description of the woman in the photos. One neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, offered a tantalizing clue. "Oh yes, I remember seeing a lady come by once or twice," she said, squinting as if trying to summon the memory. "She drove a little red convertible. Very stylish. Your husband always seemed so happy when she visited. I assumed she was a cousin or an old friend, but he never introduced us." Ellie exchanged a glance with Claire, both women silently processing the information. Happy, stylish, a red convertible. None of it fit the image of Jack's typical social circle. Whoever this woman was, she had been important to him, important enough to warrant secrecy. That night, as Ellie sat alone in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, she allowed herself to confront the uncomfortable possibility gnawing at the edges of her mind. Had Jack kept something from her, not out of malice, but out of love? Was the trust his way of ensuring she and their children would always have a place to call home, even if he couldn't be there himself? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Ellie sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she sifted through the latest batch of documents David Monroe had delivered. The anonymous bank account tied to the trust was a labyrinth of numbers and dates, but one detail stood out like a beacon. Regular deposits, always made on the same day each year since 1982. The first deposit coincided with the year Ellie became pregnant with James. Her mind raced back to that time, the exhaustion of carrying her second child, the joy of preparing for his arrival, and the countless hours Jack spent working late shifts at the factory to make ends meet. It had been a challenging yet hopeful period of their lives, but now as she stared at the ledger before her, doubt crept in. Had someone else been helping them, quietly, invisibly, during those early years? Claire hovered nearby, watching her mother's face shift between confusion and suspicion. "What does it mean, Mom? Why would anyone start sending money when you were expecting James?" "I don't know," Ellie whispered, her voice hollow, "but it feels personal, like whoever did this knew exactly when we needed help." Before either of them could say more, there was a knock at the door. Claire answered it to find Mrs. Patterson standing on the porch, clutching her cane and looking unusually flustered. "I thought of something else," the elderly neighbor said without preamble, stepping inside. "It might not be important, but I remembered seeing strangers coming to your house during that pregnancy. A man and a woman, they came separately, always late at night. They never stayed long, but they seemed familiar with Jack." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "Strangers? Did you recognize them?" Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "No, dear, just shadows passing by your window. But I do remember thinking it was odd because Jack wasn't one to entertain visitors so late. He was always such a private man." Private, yes, but perhaps not as honest as Ellie had believed. The revelation sent a chill down her spine. Who were these people? And why had Jack welcomed them into their home while keeping their existence a secret? That evening, Ellie returned to the locked wooden box. Her resolve hardened. Whatever secrets lay within, they were connected to the mystery unfolding around her. She retrieved a small toolkit from the garage, a gift from James years ago, and set to work prying open the rusted lock. Claire watched nervously, wringing her hands. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she asked. "What if it's painful?" "We'll never know unless we look," Ellie replied firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. With a final twist, the lock snapped free. Inside the box, neatly arranged, were several items: an old key, a folded letter sealed with wax, and a faded photograph of the same elegant woman from the cafe snapshots. But this time, she held a baby in her arms. The resemblance to James was unmistakable. Ellie gasped, clutching the photo as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God!" Claire leaned closer, her own breath hitching. "Is that—" "Yes," Ellie choked out. "That's James, or at least someone who looks just like him." Beneath the photograph lay the letter, its seal bearing the initials LM. Heart pounding, Ellie broke the wax and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was delicate yet deliberate. Dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then the time has come for truths to be revealed. I write this not to cause pain, but to honor the love that brought us together and the sacrifices we made along the way. Jack was a good man, but he carried burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. When fate intervened, I promised him I would protect what mattered most: your family, your home, your future. The trust exists because of James. He is my son as much as he is yours. Though I could not raise him, I vowed to ensure he and you would always have everything you needed. Please forgive me for intruding upon your life in ways you may never have understood, and please know that every choice I made was born of love. The letter ended abruptly, signed simply with the initials LM. Ellie collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. James, her sweet, quiet boy, wasn't entirely hers. Someone else had loved him, cared for him, sacrificed for him from afar. Someone whose identity remained shrouded in mystery. The next morning, Ellie called James, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. I need you to come home, she said. There's something you need to know. When James arrived later that day, the tension in the room was palpable. Claire filled him in on the events leading up to the discovery of the letter, her words rushed and apologetic. James listened silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, Ellie handed him the photograph and the letter. As he read, his hands began to shake. This can't be real, he murmured, staring at the image of the woman holding him as a baby. Who is she? I don't know yet, Ellie admitted softly. But she loved you, James, enough to give you up and still fight for you from a distance. James looked at his mother, then at Claire, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Does this change anything? About who I am? About our family? Ellie reached out, taking his hand in hers. No, sweetheart, you're still my son. Nothing will ever change that. But maybe it's time we learned the whole story together. The revelation hit Ellie like a tidal wave, pulling her under currents of betrayal and grief she hadn't known existed. As the days passed, fragments of Jack's hidden life began to surface, pieced together from old letters, faded photographs, and whispered memories. The woman in the photos, LM, was no stranger. Her name was Lydia Marsh, and she had been part of Jack's life long before he met Ellie. David Monroe uncovered the final piece of the puzzle, records showing that Lydia had given birth to a son in 1962, just 2 years before Jack and Ellie married. That boy, the one cradled in Lydia's arms in the photograph, was James. Ellie sat alone in the dim light of her temporary apartment, staring at the evidence spread across the coffee table. Each document felt like another jagged shard piercing her heart. Jack hadn't just kept secrets. He had built their family on a foundation of half-truths. James wasn't biologically hers. He was Lydia's child, conceived out of wedlock and raised as Ellie's own. But it didn't stop there. Bank statements revealed regular payments made by Jack to Lydia over the years, ensuring she and her other children, yes, there were more, could live comfortably. It explained why Jack worked double shifts, why he was often absent during holidays, why he sometimes seemed distant even when he was home. He hadn't just supported Ellie and their kids. He had carried the weight of 2 families, balancing love and obligation with devastating precision. Claire found her mother hours later, still sitting motionless amid the scattered papers. Mom, she said softly, kneeling beside her. Are you okay? Ellie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. How can I be okay, Claire? Everything I thought I knew about your father, about our life together, it's all a lie. Claire hesitated, then reached out to take her mother's hand. It's not a lie, Mom. Not completely. Dad loved you. He loved us. Maybe he made mistakes, but he did everything he could to protect us, even if it meant keeping secrets. But at what cost? Ellie whispered, clutching the photograph of Lydia and James. He took away my right to know the truth. About him, about James, about everything. When James arrived the next morning, Ellie braced herself for the hardest conversation of her life. She had rehearsed the words in her mind, but nothing could prepare her for the raw vulnerability etched into his face as she handed him the letter in the photograph. "This is you," she said gently, pointing to the baby in Lydia's arms. "And this is your mother. Her name was Lydia Marsh." James stared at the image, his hands trembling. "You're saying I'm not yours?" "You are mine," Ellie insisted, her voice breaking. "In every way that matters, you've always been my son. But biologically—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. James sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did Dad keep this from me?" "He thought he was protecting you," Ellie replied, her tone heavy with sorrow. "Protecting both of us. Back then, things were different. People judged harshly. He wanted to give you a stable home, a good life, with me." For a long moment, James said nothing, his emotions locked behind a wall of silence. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "I need to meet her. If she's still alive, I need to know who she is, who I am." Ellie nodded, understanding the ache in his voice. "We'll find her, James, together." As the days turned into weeks, the family grappled with the fallout of Jack's secrets. Claire struggled to reconcile the image of her devoted father with the man who had lived a double life. James wrestled with questions of identity, torn between the mother who raised him and the one who gave him life. And Ellie faced the deepest wound of all, the realization that the man she had loved so fiercely had also kept her at arm's length. Yet amidst the pain, moments of grace began to emerge. Claire accompanied Ellie to the library, helping her dig through archives for any trace of Lydia. James called nightly, sharing updates on his search for answers. Slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild the bonds fractured by Jack's choices, not to erase the hurt, but to heal around it. One evening, as Ellie sorted through yet another box of mementos, she found a note tucked inside an old photo album. Written in Jack's familiar scrawl, it read, "To my dearest Eleanor, if you ever find this, know that I loved you more than words can say. Every decision I made was for you, for us. Please forgive me for the secrets I kept. You are my heart, my home, my forever." Tears blurred Ellie's vision as she clutched the note to her chest. For all his flaws, Jack had loved her. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she realized something crucial. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about choosing to move forward together. Lydia Marsh had spent decades bearing her secrets, convinced that silence was the kindest gift she could give her son. When James was born in 1962, she was just 20 years old, a waitress at a small-town diner, unmarried and unprepared for the weight of motherhood. Jack Harper, then a young mechanic with dreams of starting his own garage, had stepped in to help when no one else would. He paid for her hospital bills, bought baby clothes, and slipped her cash whenever he could. But their relationship ended abruptly after James turned 2. Jack met Eleanor, Ellie, and fell deeply in love. Lydia understood. Ellie offered him stability, a future untainted by scandal. So Lydia let him go, raising James on her own while quietly accepting the monthly checks Jack sent to ensure their survival. It wasn't much, but it kept them afloat. Years passed and Lydia remarried, giving birth to 2 more children who grew up believing James was their full brother. She never told him the truth about his father, not because she wanted to erase Jack from his life, but because she feared losing him altogether. To James, Jack was a distant memory, a shadowy figure glimpsed only in photographs tucked away in an old shoebox. Then 5 years ago, everything changed. It started with a letter delivered to Lydia's modest home. The return address bore the name Harper Estate Trust. Confused, she opened it to find a brief note informing her of a trust fund established in James's name, tied to the property at 12 Maple Lane. There were no details about its origins or purpose, only instructions to contact David Monroe if she wished to learn more. Lydia hesitated. For decades, she had shielded James from the truth, fearing it might fracture the fragile bond they shared. But curiosity gnawed at her. Who had set up this trust? And why now, after so many years? She called David Monroe, her voice trembling as she asked questions he couldn't or wouldn't answer. All he could tell her was that the trust existed to protect the house and those connected to it. If you want answers, he said gently, you'll need to speak with Eleanor Harper. Lydia hung up the phone, her heart racing. Eleanor Harper, the woman Jack had married, the woman who had raised her son. That night, Lydia finally broke her silence. Sitting across from James at the kitchen table, she handed him the photograph she'd kept hidden for nearly 40 years. The same image Ellie now held in her possession. "This is you," Lydia said softly, tears streaming down her face. "And this," she pointed to the man smiling beside her in the photo, "is your father." James stared at the picture, stunned. "My father? But Dad—" "Your stepfather," Lydia corrected, her voice breaking. "The man who raised you isn't the man who gave you life. That was Jack Harper." For hours they talked, Lydia spilling out decades of buried truths, James struggling to process the revelation. By the end of the conversation, one thing was clear. James needed to know more. About Jack, about the trust, about the family he never knew he had. Unbeknownst to either side, both families were moving toward the same destination. While Ellie, Claire, and James searched for Lydia, she too was piecing together clues about the Harpers. Through social media and local news articles, she learned about Ellie's stroke, the sale of the house, and the mysterious trust fund tied to it. When James finally tracked her down using public records, Lydia hesitated before picking up the phone. This was the moment she had dreaded and hoped for all her life. Would he hate her for keeping the truth from him? Or would he understand why she had done it? "Hello," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Marsh?" James replied, his tone cautious but warm. "This is James Harper. I think we need to talk." By the time they arranged to meet, Lydia felt like she was walking into a storm. She arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to rendezvous, clutching the same photograph she had shown James weeks earlier. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a man who looked so much like Jack that her breath caught in her throat. "Ms. Marsh," James replied, his tone cautious but warm. "This is James Harper. I think we need to talk." By the time they arranged to meet, Lydia felt like she was walking into a storm. She arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to rendezvous, clutching the same photograph she had shown James weeks earlier. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on a man who looked so much like Jack that her breath caught in her throat. "James," she said simply, standing as he approached. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're my mom." Lydia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, and I'm so sorry for everything." They sat together for hours, unraveling the tangled threads of their shared history. Lydia explained how Jack had supported them, how she had chosen secrecy over disclosure to protect him and James from judgment. In turn, James shared what he had learned from Ellie, the existence of the trust, the sacrifices Jack had made, and the love that had bound their fractured family together. By the time they parted ways, something remarkable had happened. Forgiveness, not absolution, but understanding, had begun to take root. Back in Ellie's world, the pieces were falling into place. A private investigator hired by David Monroe confirmed Lydia's identity, along with her role in James's early life. When Ellie heard the news, she felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the mystery was finally coming to light, and sorrow for the pain Lydia must have endured. "Do you think she'll agree to meet us?" Claire asked tentatively during one of their late-night conversations. "I hope so," Ellie replied, staring out the window at the darkened sky. "We owe it to her and to ourselves to hear her side of the story." What neither of them expected was how quickly that meeting would come. Days later, Lydia reached out, her voice trembling but determined. "I'd like to see you all," she said, "if you're willing." Ellie agreed without hesitation. Whatever scars remained, they would face them together. As a family reunited not by blood alone, but by the enduring power of love and forgiveness. The revelation came quietly, almost as an afterthought during Lydia and James's second meeting. They had reconvened at the same cafe where Lydia first introduced him to the truth about his father. This time, however, their conversation turned toward the trust, a thread neither of them fully understood until now. "It was you," Lydia said suddenly, her voice soft but tinged with awe. "You created the trust, didn't you?" James froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about? I didn't create anything." Lydia pulled a folded document from her purse, the letter she'd received years ago informing her of the trust fund tied to 12 Maple Lane. This wasn't just some random act of charity. Someone set this up decades ago, long before you even knew who your father was. And then there's the timing. She trailed off, shaking her head. It all points to one person. Realization dawned on James slowly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He remembered fragments of conversations overheard as a child, whispers between Lydia and mysterious benefactors, envelopes slipped under the door late at night. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. He assumed they were gifts from distant relatives or friends. But looking back, the pattern was undeniable. I, I think I might have done it, James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not consciously, anyway. When I started making money, after college, when my business took off, I wanted to give back, to honor Dad, even though I didn't know who he was yet. His gaze dropped to the table, shame flickering across his features. I guess I hired someone to look into Mom's finances without telling her, to make sure she was okay. That's probably how the trust got started. Lydia reached out, covering his hand with hers. You were honoring your father's memory without even realizing it. Jack would be so proud of you, James. When James shared this discovery with Ellie and Claire during their next family gathering, the room fell silent. Ellie sat rigid in her chair, clutching the arms for support as the weight of his words sank in. Her son, the man she had raised, loved, and nurtured, had unknowingly fulfilled Jack's greatest wish, ensuring that she would always have a home. You did this, Ellie murmured, tears streaming down her face. For me. James nodded, his own eyes glistening. I didn't know why at the time. I just felt compelled, like it was something I had to do. Now I see it was because of him, because of everything he taught me, even if I didn't realize it growing up. Claire watched the exchange, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. For years, she had resented the secrets Jack kept, blaming him for the fractures in their family. But now, seeing how deeply his love had shaped them all, even from beyond the grave, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of forgiveness. He protected us, Claire said softly, more to herself than anyone else. In his own way, he protected us all. With the mystery of the trust resolved, the family turned its focus inward, working to rebuild what had been broken. Lydia became a regular presence in their lives, welcomed not as an outsider, but as part of the tapestry that bound them together. Though the house at 12 Maple Lane was gone, its spirit lived on in the bonds they forged anew. Ellie found solace in knowing that Jack's sacrifices had not been in vain. Through James's actions, his legacy endured, a testament to the enduring power of love and duty. The funds from the trust allowed her to purchase a smaller home nearby, close enough for frequent visits from Claire, James, and their families. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie stood on the porch of her new home, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Claire approached, handing her a steaming mug of tea. You okay, Mom? Claire asked gently. Ellie smiled, nodding. More than okay. This place may not be 12 Maple Lane, but it's still home. Because home isn't just a building, it's the people we share it with. Claire wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulders, pulling her close. We'll always have each other, Mom, no matter what. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle overhead, Ellie felt a profound sense of peace. The secrets that had once divided them had ultimately brought them closer together, forging a bond stronger than any wall could contain. And in that moment, she knew they would heal. Not perfectly, not overnight, but surely step by step, heart by heart. The fragile peace Ellie had begun to rebuild shattered one evening when Claire arrived at her new home, her face pale and drawn. She hesitated on the threshold, clutching a manila envelope tightly in her hands. For a moment, she looked like a child caught doing something wrong, guilt etched into every line of her expression. Mom, she began, her voice trembling, there's something I need to tell you. Ellie frowned, setting down the book she'd been reading. The tone in Claire's voice sent a chill through her. What is it? Claire stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what came next. I knew about the trust, about the conditions tied to the house. I've known for years. Ellie stared at her, stunned. You knew? How? It was part of Dad's estate planning, Claire admitted, avoiding her mother's gaze. When he passed away, his lawyer gave me copies of all the documents, including the ones detailing the trust. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after your stroke, her voice cracked and she paused to steady herself. I thought selling the house would solve everything, for both of us. The money from the sale could cover your medical bills, give you stability, and maybe help me too. Ellie's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. You sold the house knowing it violated the terms of the trust, knowing it put everything at risk. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I convinced myself it was the right thing to do, that the trust was outdated, unnecessary. I told myself no one would care, that we needed the money more than we needed some old house. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. But I was wrong, Mom. So wrong. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by Claire's quiet sobs. Ellie felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, but also an aching sadness. This wasn't just about the house or the trust. It was about trust itself, the foundation of their relationship, and how easily it could crumble under the weight of fear and desperation. Why didn't you come to me? Ellie asked finally, her voice soft but firm. If you were struggling, why didn't you say something? Claire lifted her head, guilt and shame etched across her face. Because I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle things on my own. I've always tried to be strong. For you, for the kids. But sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, Mom, and selling the house felt like the only way out. Ellie sighed, her anger giving way to compassion. She sat beside Claire, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to carry everything alone. We're a family. We're supposed to lean on each other, not push each other away. Claire looked at her mother, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything, for betraying you, for ruining what Dad worked so hard to protect. Ellie shook her head gently. You didn't ruin anything, Claire. Yes, you made a mistake, a big one. But mistakes are how we learn. What matters now is what you do next. Over the following weeks, Claire threw herself into making amends. With David Monroe's help, she worked tirelessly to reverse the sale of the house, negotiating with the buyers to nullify the transaction. It wasn't easy. There were legal hurdles, financial penalties, and moments when it seemed impossible. But Claire refused to give up. Meanwhile, Ellie encouraged open conversations within the family, creating space for everyone to share their struggles and fears. Lydia joined them for dinners, sharing stories about Jack that painted a fuller picture of the man they had loved and lost. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, not just between Ellie and Claire, but among all of them. One evening, as they gathered around the dining table in Ellie's new home, James raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, his voice warm with emotion, to forgiveness, healing, and finding our way back to each other. They clinked glasses, laughter mingling with tears. For the first time in months, Ellie felt hopeful, not because life was perfect, but because they were facing it together. In the end, the house at 12 Maple Lane returned to Ellie's possession, its walls once again standing as a symbol of resilience and love. Though much had changed, the spirit of the home remained intact, a testament to the enduring power of family. As Ellie stood in the doorway, watching Claire and James unpack boxes alongside Lydia, she realized that home wasn't defined by four walls or a roof overhead. It was the people who filled it with love, even in the face of loss and betrayal. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. The tension between Ellie and Claire lingered like a storm cloud, heavy and unyielding. Despite Ellie's attempts to forgive her daughter, the betrayal over the sale of 12 Maple Lane and the violation of the trust had left deep scars. Claire worked tirelessly to make amends, but every conversation seemed to reopen old wounds, leaving both women emotionally drained. It was during one such heated exchange that James arrived unexpectedly at Ellie's new home. He stood in the doorway, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by an air of determination. "We need to talk," he said firmly, his gaze shifting between his mother and sister. "All of us." Ellie sighed, gesturing for him to sit. "What is it, James?" James hesitated, then pulled out a stack of faded envelopes from his jacket pocket. "I got these too," he admitted, spreading them across the table. Each envelope bore the same cryptic message: protect the house, honor the legacy. Claire frowned, picking up one of the letters. "When did you get these?" "Years ago," James replied, his voice tinged with regret. "I thought they were scams or hoaxes. I didn't think much of them at the time, just tossed them aside. But now," he trailed off, shaking his head, "now I realize they were trying to warn me, to prepare me for exactly what happened." Ellie stared at her son, her heart aching with the weight of missed opportunities. "Why didn't you say something? If we'd known—" "I dismissed them," James interrupted, guilt flashing across his face. "I told myself it wasn't my problem. Not really. That Dad had taken care of everything, and there was nothing left for me to do." He paused, looking down at the worn paper in his hands. "But I was wrong. Just like Claire was wrong. We both failed. To listen, to act, to protect what mattered most." James turned to Claire, his tone softening. "You thought selling the house would fix things, but you ignored the bigger picture, the reason behind the trust. It wasn't just about money or even the house itself. It was about honoring Dad's memory, about keeping our family connected to something greater than ourselves." Claire nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know that now. But how do I make it right? How do I undo the damage I've done?" "You start by being honest," James said firmly, "with yourself, with Mom, with all of us. This isn't just your burden to carry, it's ours, together." He looked at Ellie, his expression earnest. "And you, Mom, you have to let her try. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means giving her and yourself a chance to heal." Ellie sat quietly, absorbing his words. She glanced at Claire, who sat with her head bowed, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. The pain in the room was palpable, but so was the love, a fragile thread binding them together despite their mistakes. Finally, Ellie reached out, taking Claire's hand in hers. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "Together." Over the next few weeks, James became the glue holding the family together. He organized meetings with David Monroe to navigate the legal complexities of reclaiming the house, ensuring that the terms of the trust were fully restored. Meanwhile, he encouraged open conversations among Ellie, Claire, and Lydia, creating space for each of them to share their feelings without judgment. One evening, as they gathered around the kitchen table in Ellie's temporary apartment, James spoke up. "I think we've been focusing on the wrong thing," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about the house or the trust. It's about why Dad created it in the first place, to keep us connected, to remind us that no matter where life takes us, we always have each other." Lydia nodded, her eyes glistening. "Jack loved you all more than anything. Every decision he made, every sacrifice, he did it because he wanted you to have a future full of love and security." Ellie reached across the table, placing a hand over Lydia's. "And we honor that love by staying together, by forgiving each other when we falter and supporting each other when we fall." Claire wiped away a tear, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this right, if you'll let me." Ellie smiled through her own tears, squeezing Claire's hand. "You already are." When the paperwork was finally complete and 12 Maple Lane officially returned to Ellie's ownership, the family celebrated with a quiet gathering in the backyard. The hydrangeas Ellie had planted decades ago still bloomed vibrantly, their blue petals swaying gently in the breeze. It felt symbolic, like life finding beauty even after hardship. As they stood together beneath the golden light of sunset, James raised a toast. "To Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for teaching us the true meaning of family, and to us, for finding our way back to each other." They clinked glasses, laughter mingling with tears. For the first time in months, Ellie felt whole again, not because the house was theirs once more, but because they were rebuilding the foundation of trust and love that Jack had fought so hard to preserve. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Ellie knew they would be okay. Not perfectly, not immediately, but surely, step by step, heart by heart. The question hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Now that 12 Maple Lane was back in Ellie's possession and the trust restored, what would they do about Claire's actions? The legal ramifications of her decision to sell the house were clear. She had violated the terms of the trust, betrayed their father's wishes, and risked losing everything Jack had worked so hard to protect. But as James, Claire, and Ellie sat together in the living room of the newly reclaimed home, it became evident that the real issue wasn't legal. It was emotional. The bitterness dividing them ran deeper than any court ruling could address. To move forward, they would need to confront not just Claire's mistakes, but the pain and mistrust those mistakes had sown. James leaned forward, his voice measured but firm. "We have two choices here," he began. "We can take this to court, hold Claire accountable for breaking the trust's terms, or we can let it go, forgive her, and focus on healing as a family." Claire flinched at his words, guilt washing over her face. She had spent weeks trying to undo the damage she'd caused, but the idea of facing legal consequences terrified her. Worse still was the thought of losing her siblings' respect and her mother's love for good. Ellie watched both of her children silently, her heart torn between justice and compassion. On one hand, Claire's actions had been reckless and selfish, deserving of accountability. On the other, pursuing legal action would only deepen the rifts within their family, a rift Jack had spent his life trying to prevent. Finally, Ellie spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "This isn't just about what's fair or right. It's about what will bring us closer or drive us further apart." James turned to Claire, his expression thoughtful. "You knew what you were doing when you sold the house. You ignored the rules, the history, the meaning behind all of it. That hurt Mom and me. But I also know you didn't do it out of malice. You thought you were helping." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I swear, James, I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was fixing things, making life easier for everyone." "And instead you made it harder," James said gently. "But holding on to anger won't fix anything either. We've already lost too much time. To resentment, to secrets, to fear. If we keep fighting each other, we're no better than the problems we're trying to solve." He looked at Ellie, seeking guidance. "Mom, what do you want? This is your call." Ellie sighed deeply, her gaze drifting to the photographs lining the mantel. Images of happier times, of Jack smiling beside her, of James and Claire as children playing in the yard. Her heart ached with the weight of the decision before her, but clarity slowly emerged through the fog of emotion. "I want my family back," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Not perfect, not without scars, but whole, together." She turned to Claire, her tone softening. "That means forgiving you, sweetheart. Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying this anger is killing us. All of us." Claire broke down completely, burying her face in her hands. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for giving me another chance." With Ellie's decision made, the siblings agreed to drop any legal action against Claire. Instead, they focused on rebuilding their relationships, one conversation at a time. James took the lead, organizing weekly family dinners where everyone, Ellie, Claire, Lydia, and even Claire's teenage twins, could come together to share stories, laughter, and meals. During one such gathering, James brought up the topic of the trust again, this time with a lighter tone. "You know, Dad really knew how to make things complicated," he joked, earning chuckles from around the table. "But maybe that's why it worked, because it forced us to talk, to actually listen to each other." Lydia smiled, raising her glass. "To Jack," she said warmly, "for loving you all enough to leave behind something worth fighting for." "To Jack," they echoed, clinking glasses. In the months that followed, the family found new ways to honor Jack's memory. They transformed 12 Maple Lane into more than just a home. It became a sanctuary for connection and healing. Claire volunteered to repaint the walls, choosing colors inspired by happy memories of childhood summers. James refinished the old wooden floors, sanding away years of wear to reveal their original warmth. Even Lydia joined in, planting new flowers in the garden to symbolize growth and renewal. Ellie watched it all unfold, her heart swelling with gratitude. Though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she knew they were stronger together, bound not just by blood, but by the lessons they had learned along the way. One evening, as she sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, James joined her, handing her a mug of tea. "You think Dad would be proud of us?" he asked quietly. Ellie smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart, he already is." And as the golden light faded into twilight, enveloping the house in a warm glow, Ellie felt a profound sense of peace. Home wasn't just four walls or a roof overhead. It was the people who filled it with love, forgiveness, and hope. After hours of quiet reflection and countless cups of tea, Ellie finally spoke aloud, as if addressing Jack himself. "You always said family comes first," she murmured, tracing the rim of her mug with her fingertips. "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." With that thought firmly planted in her mind, she called James and Claire to meet her in the study, the room where so much of this journey had begun. The siblings arrived cautiously, unsure what to expect. Ellie greeted them with a soft smile, though her eyes betrayed the weight of her deliberation. "I've made my decision," she said simply, holding up a hand to silence their questions before they could begin. "There will be no legal action against Claire. No court battles, no further punishment. We've all been hurt enough by this mess, and dragging it out won't bring us any closer to healing." Claire exhaled sharply, relief washing over her face. But James frowned slightly. "Are you sure, Mom? She broke the trust, not just legally but emotionally. Don't you think there needs to be some accountability?" Ellie nodded, acknowledging his concern. "Of course there does, but accountability doesn't have to mean anger or division. Claire has already taken steps to make amends, and I believe she's truly sorry. What we need now isn't justice, it's closure." She turned to Claire, her gaze steady, yet compassionate. "You'll continue helping me rebuild what was lost, and together we'll ensure that the spirit of this house, the love and sacrifice it represents, is preserved for future generations." Claire swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll never take anything, or anyone, for granted again." With the legal matter settled, Ellie turned her attention to the next chapter of her life. Though 12 Maple Lane would forever hold a special place in her heart, she realized it was time to embrace a new beginning. Using the remaining funds from the trust, she purchased a small cottage near James's home, a cozy retreat surrounded by towering pines and serene lakeside views. "It's perfect," James said during one of their visits, standing beside her on the porch as they admired the tranquil landscape. "Close enough for me to check in on you, but far enough to feel like your own space." Ellie smiled, leaning on her cane as she took in the sight. It felt peaceful, like a fresh start. Lydia joined them later that afternoon, carrying a basket of freshly baked cookies. "I thought you might need something sweet to christen the new place," she said warmly, setting the basket on the kitchen counter. Ellie laughed, gesturing for her to sit. "You're spoiling me already." "Well, someone has to," Lydia replied with a wink. "Besides, I figure it's the least I can do after everything you've done for James. And for me." As the three of them sat around the kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter, Ellie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of forgiveness. On the day Ellie officially moved into the cottage, the entire family gathered to celebrate. Claire brought photo albums filled with memories of 12 Maple Lane, while James hung a plaque above the fireplace, engraved with Jack's favorite quote, "Home is not a place, it's the people who fill it with love." Even Lydia played a role, planting a rose bush in the front yard, a tribute to Jack and the sacrifices he had made to keep them all connected. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Ellie stood on the porch, watching her grandchildren chase fireflies in the twilight. "This is exactly what he would have wanted," James said softly, joining her. "A family united, even after everything we've been through." Ellie nodded, her heart swelling with pride and love. "Yes, it is. And I think, in his own way, he gave us exactly what we needed to get here." Years later, the cottage became a cherished part of family lore, a testament to the strength of bonds forged through hardship and healed by forgiveness. Future generations would gather there, listening to stories of Jack's quiet heroism, Ellie's unwavering resilience, and the lessons learned about love, loyalty, and letting go. For Ellie, the cottage wasn't just a physical space. It was proof that home transcended walls and roofs. It lived in the laughter of children playing in the yard, in the warmth of shared meals, and in the unspoken understanding that no matter how far apart life might take them, they would always find their way back to each other. And as she sat on the porch swing one final evening, wrapped in a blanket beneath a starlit sky, Ellie whispered a silent thank you to Jack, to her children, and to the mysterious forces that had guided them all toward healing. Because in the end, home wasn't a single place or moment. It was the sum of every choice, every sacrifice, and every act of love that kept them tethered to one another. It was a rainy afternoon when Ellie stumbled upon the letter, tucked inside an old cigar box buried deep in Jack's closet. She had been sorting through his belongings again, unable to part with the last remnants of their life together. The box smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco, a scent that instantly transported her back to lazy Sunday mornings, spent reading newspapers side by side. Inside, beneath a stack of receipts and ticket stubs from concerts they'd attended years ago, lay a single envelope addressed to her in Jack's familiar scrawl. Her name was written carefully, as if he had taken extra time to make sure it was perfect. Heart pounding, she opened it and began to read. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to say these words myself. First, let me tell you how sorry I am for everything, for the secrets I kept, the burdens I carried alone, and the moments when my silence must have felt like distance. Please know that every decision I made, no matter how flawed or painful, was born out of love for you and our children. I wish I could go back and do things differently. Be more open. Share the weight of those choices with you instead of shouldering them on my own. But I was afraid of losing your trust, your love, the beautiful life we built together. So I chose secrecy over honesty, believing it was the only way to protect us all. But please believe me when I say this. I loved you with every fiber of my being. From the moment I met you until my very last breath, you were my heart, my home, my forever. And though I couldn't always show it the way I wanted to, please know that my devotion never wavered. Not for 1 second. Take care of each other. Hold tight to the memories we made in that house, because they are the foundation of who we are. And remember this, no matter what challenges come your way, you are stronger than you think. Stronger than any secret, any loss, any pain. With all my love, Jack. Ellie folded the letter gently, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession, raw and unfiltered, revealing the man behind the mask of strength and stoicism. He had been human, just like her. Flawed, fearful, yet fiercely devoted. She sat there for a long time, clutching the letter to her chest, letting the words wash over her. In that moment, she felt closer to Jack than she had in years, as if he were sitting beside her, whispering reassurances into the quiet hum of the rain. Later that evening, as the storm cleared and the sky turned a soft shade of lavender, Ellie settled onto the porch swing of her new cottage. Around her were mementos of happier times, photographs of Jack and the kids, Lydia's rosebush blooming proudly in the yard, and the plaque James had hung above the fireplace. Even the wooden box Claire had reluctantly returned now rested on a shelf inside, its secrets laid bare, but its purpose fulfilled. She rocked slowly, sipping tea as the cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance, she heard laughter, her grandchildren playing near the lake, their voices carrying on the wind like music. It was a sound that filled her with peace, a reminder that life moves forward even when grief lingers. As twilight descended, painting the world in hues of gold and pink, Ellie closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel it all, the sorrow, the joy, the gratitude. She thought about Jack, about the family they had created together, and about the legacy of love and resilience they had passed on to future generations. And though she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, with courage, with grace, and with the unwavering knowledge that she was never truly alone. Because home wasn't just a place, It was the people who loved her, the memories they shared, and the promise of tomorrow.